Our next speaker is going to be Asia Willis with ADHS, Bureau of Infectious Disease and Services. And Asia's presentation is on 2022 Salmonella Litchfield investigation. This is Asia's bio.
Asia Willis is a foodborne and waterborne disease epidemiologist at the Arizona Department of Health Services. She received a Bachelor's of Science in Biology from the University of South Carolina Upstate and an MPH in Epidemiology from the University of South Carolina. Asia also has 4 years of experience working as a state lab analyst for IEH Laboratories and Consulting Group.
Perfect. Asia, if you're ready, you can unmute yourself and share your presentation.
Absolutely. Yeah. Alrighty, good morning, everyone. I hope you all are enjoying the conference so far. Due to some internet issues, I'm going to just keep my camera off. And so today I will be presenting, well, on a very interesting outbreak. I may be a little bit biased because this was my first multi-state outbreak of my career. So let's get started. All right. So on August 25th, 2022, Arizona State Public Health Lab notified of a Salmonella Litchfield cluster containing 3 cases that are highly related by CG-MLST. And we analyzed the isolates and found that there were 0 SNPs apart between isolates obtained from the case specimens via the NCBI tree. And onset dates of these cases range from July 6th to August 4th. Out of the 3 cases, 1 was lost to follow-up. And the cluster contained 2 males and 1 female. The age range was 16 to 67 years, with a median of 33 years of age. And 1 case was hospitalized. This cluster contained 2 cases in Pima County and 1 in Maricopa County. So we began our investigation and identified 5 cases in California that were highly related to our cases in the cluster. So we contacted our California state partners, one, to make them aware of their highly related cases, and to also ask about any noteworthy exposures they may have identified. And we also identified a food isolate from a barramundi fish from Vietnam in 2021, and a clinical isolate from the United Kingdom. And so common exposures of this initial cluster includes birds, more specifically parrots, and reptiles such as turtles and lizards, along with food from either Asian-style restaurants or just restaurants that served Asia-based cuisine. So we received a second notification about 3 new cases highly related to our initial cluster on September 6th, so about 12 days later. The cluster now has 6 cases overall, with 2 cases in Pima County and 4 cases in Maricopa County. And so there are now 2 male cases and 4 female cases overall in this cluster. And the age range is still 16 to 67 years, with the median age being 33. And now we have 3 cases in this cluster that have been hospitalized. So these new cases have signals towards Asian-style restaurants, similar to cases in the initial cluster. And additionally, there are signals of seafood and health food products such as protein powder, protein shakes, and supplements. And something interesting to note is that the new cases are all female from Maricopa County. And onset dates occurred within a 4-day time span from August 15th through August 19th. So a multi-state call was held on September 7th of 2022 to generate a hypothesis. At this time, there are 19 cases overall in this cluster from 3 states, and that's Arizona, California, and Illinois. CDC reported common exposures from all states, in which those exposures were consistent with what we saw in our cases. Cases from other states also reported consuming protein products like bars and shakes, seafood, and Asian-style cuisines. So from an epi perspective, this cluster is starting to get pretty interesting at this point. And a supplemental questionnaire was created and deployed 2 days later on September 9th. So then there was a third case notification on September 19th about 3 new cases, bringing our total case cluster count in Arizona to 9. This was a 12-day span of onset from August 17th through the 29th for these new cases. One was lost to follow-up, and like the cases from the previous notification, we noticed that all new cases are female from Maricopa County. Even more interesting is that 2 cases were located in the city of Chandler within the same zip code. And 2 out of 3 cases initially reported raw fish consumption in poke bowl during the standard interview. So now we are now able to re-interview these cases with the supplemental questionnaire to gather ingredient details for these poke bowls, which turns out to actually be really helpful. And just in case you're unfamiliar with what a poke bowl is, it is a relatively healthy dish that contains seafood that can be raw or cooked, a variety of vegetables, and topped with sauces that is commonly served over rice. So this dish is highly customizable at restaurants. Therefore, it's important, especially in this investigation, to have a very thorough case interview to capture as much ingredient exposure data as we can. So 10 cases were successfully re-interviewed during the supplemental questionnaire by CDC Foundation investigators and members of ADHS's food team. The supplemental questionnaire included questions about those common signals we identified in previous notifications, with detailed questions about seafood, health food products, and Asian foods. And cases were asked about specific ingredients in their dishes. Cases used receipts and food menus to help recall what was eaten, which we encourage as it helps us to get more complete exposure data. And the supplemental interviews identified raw seafood as an exposure of interest. So 8 out of those 10 cases reported consumption of sushi, sashimi, or poke. 6 out of 10 of those cases reported consumption of raw salmon. 1 out of 10 cases reported consumption of shrimp, and 1 out of 10 cases reported consumption of raw tuna. Compared to just Arizona's cluster, 18 supplemental questionnaires were completed overall, including those from other states. And 72% or 13 of those cases re-interviewed reported consumption of raw fish, seafood, or poke. And of the 12 cases who remembered the details of their meal, 83% or 10 out of those cases reported having raw salmon. Only 2 cases reported raw tuna and consuming raw tuna and no raw salmon together. And this is confirming, along with Arizona's data of raw salmon being a being a food item of interest. So our EH team initiated record collection from restaurants with assistance from Maricopa and Pima County's local environmental health teams as well. And 2 restaurant clusters were identified, which are defined in this presentation as restaurants A and B here. So for restaurant A, 1 case went to a Chandler location, and another case went to a Phoenix location. And the meal dates for these 2 cases occurred within the same week. and both of these cases reported a poke bowl with raw salmon. So for restaurant B, there are actually 2 locations that are both in Tucson. And so there was one case that went to one location in Tucson, and then there were 2 other cases that went to the other location in Tucson. And the meal dates for those 2 cases that visited the same location occurred within the same week. So the California Department of Public Health and the FDA performed a traceback to identify a common distributor of all restaurants with reported ill case clusters. And these partners reported a challenge actually with record collection of several restaurants. And so an alternative route to mitigate this challenge was just to collect records from the distributor. And one common distributor was identified in Phoenix, and traced back from the record collection revealed that all of the 4 restaurant locations that are a part of the 2 restaurant subclusters in Arizona purchased seafood from this distributor. And the distributor receives its seafood from the sister location in California. And the sister location in California was also identified as supplying seafood products to actually 2 restaurant clusters in the state of California. So several steps ensued after the identification of that manufacturer, which includes investigation, inspection of the facility, and administering corrective actions. And so the California Department of Health and FDA conducted an investigation of that common manufacturer in California on October 6th through October 7th of 2022. And the investigation consisted of swab collection and sampling of all finished product for testing. And 100 swabs were collected from 2 zones in the facility, and 30 finished product subsamples were also collected. And salmonella was not detected in any of the finished product samples. And the 18 out of 100 swabs were CRO for salmonella. And those 18 CRO swabs were confirmed positive for salmonella species. And culturing and whole genome sequencing of 61 isolates from those 18 positive cultures followed. And initial whole genome sequencing results indicated 3 isolates were closely related to the outbreak strain on October 17th. And then a 4th match was actually added 2 days later on the 19th. And all of those matching isolates were from the same environmental swab, which was collected from a pallet on the floor near the employee entrance. And then the remaining 55 isolates were closely related to each other. So there were several findings related to the HACCP plan. Production workers were observed using a high pressure hose to spray their smocks and boots. And the blast of water would hit the floor and create an aerosol around salmon fillets being packed. And the firm failed to conduct operations under conditions and controls necessary to minimize the potential for growth or survival of microorganisms and contamination of food. And the firm also failed to monitor the sanitation conditions and practices with sufficient frequency to assure compliance with current GMPs. And so due to inspection and investigation results, several corrective actions were performed in the facility. Several deep cleanings took place in the facility, which included disassembling the portioning and skinning machines and using chlorinated foam cleaner to douse the entire facility. Also, salmon processing operations were halted for 7 days, and additional swabbing and testing occurred in-house, which all resulted negative for salmonella. And then original pallets were replaced with heat-treated pallets which reduced the risk of contamination from bacteria. So fresh processed fish was voluntarily recalled on October 20th. This includes salmon, Chilean sea bass, halibut, tuna, and swordfish. And although salmon was implicated as the vehicle, in the presence of salmonella in the processing environment indicated additional types of fish processed in the same area of the facility could have also been contaminated. So in order to best prevent future highly related illness, and then those additional fish types were recalled as well. And so there are a total of 13 cases from Arizona associated with the Salmonella Litchfield outbreak. About 85% of cases were female in the age range of 16 to 67 years, and that median of 33 years were consistent throughout the investigation. About 54% of cases were hospitalized, and cases were 0 to 3 SNPs apart via NCBI, and that indicates high relatedness. And so all cases were between Maricopa and Pima counties. And this is compared to the overall outbreak descriptor FE, where there were a total of 39 cases from 4 states. And I'd also like to note that Texas and Illinois cases reported travel to California and Arizona prior to illness onset. And median age, gender percentage, and hospitalization percentage were consistent between our Arizona's local investigation and the overall multi-state investigation, with the majority of cases being female and around half the cases being hospitalized. And because the product went directly to the restaurants, there were no action items for the general public. And so we just shared the recall info with the counties and had our environmental health teams work with restaurants to make sure the product was not being sold and consumed. In regards to the CDC, their main audience of their outbreak notice is the general public, not businesses. So a food safety alert was posted to CDC website, and CDC also reiterated the risk of eating raw seafood and advised people at higher risk not to eat raw fish or shellfish. And so there were several lessons learned across all of the involved agencies. Restaurant subclusters were the key to identifying raw salmon as the vehicle. It was challenging to parse out salmon and tuna exposures, with multiple patients reporting both raw salmon and raw tuna consumption. The presence of salmonella in the processing environment indicated additional types of fish processed in the same area of facility could have also been contaminated. Also, having a product distribution map in FDA's posting is especially important in outbreaks where contaminated products were distributed to just a few states. And some fish processors and distributors continue to share disclaimers with customers, including sushi and poke restaurants, indicating product is intended to be cooked. And last but definitely not least, partnership between state, local, and federal partners was and always will be essential. And so there were a lot of moving parts in this investigation, and therefore a lot of different partners to acknowledge and give thanks to, including federal, state, and local. And so all agencies listed played an essential role, just ensuring the investigation moved efficiently, which is key to prevent future illnesses. So to them, a big thank you. And once again, my name is Asia Willis, and here's my contact. So if there are any questions or we want to have further discussions at a later date, I know we're on a time schedule, please feel free to reach out. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Asia. We do have a couple of questions for you here. Our first question is, was the SAFER team from UA involved in investigating these Salmonella Litchfield cases? It somewhat rings a bell.
I think maybe they were. And so I do need to acknowledge them as well. That was not intentional. To not leave them off the side of the slide. So I think they were involved. So thank you, SAFER team. You are also an important part.
It happens. The other question is, how are cases initially identified? Are they those individuals who seek medical attention?
Yes. So what happens is, and we see this a lot in enteric illnesses. So those that do seek medical attention, and then they'll most likely give a sample, and if positive for salmonella, then they're required. We are notified here, and then the species. Gosh, I can't talk. The sample is sent to our lab, and it's cultured out, and that's how it's initially identified, along with those other cases together as well, and we found that they're highly related. And I will say that, you know, there's always could be more cases, but those that don't get medical attention are often left out.
Looks like we had another question pop up here. The contamination at the facility was from improper sanitizing practices. Was there a follow-up after this event to ensure the proper practices were implemented?
So, given that for the investigation and regarding the facility, that was FDA and California Department of Public Health, I unfortunately don't have that detailed information about follow-up and the contamination of the facility and type in practice. I believe all of that came into play, yes, with the spraying of the boots as well. Definitely played a part in contaminating all of those fish products. But for follow-up, just to ensure that those practices were continued, those proper practices were continued. I'm sure there was follow-up, but I don't have any detailed information regarding that.
All right, looks like that about wraps up for questions. Thank you so much, Asia, for your presentation. We really appreciate you taking time out of your day to be with us here.